Welcome everybody to today's webinar, Achieving Modular Multifamily Affordable Housing, brought to you by the Open Architectural Collaborative, the AIA Housing Knowledge Communities, and EDI International. Thank you. I am the facilitator today, Tommy Burns. I am a graduate of Roger Williams University. I have done some public interest design work internationally and in the U.S., and I'm currently working in the Boston area on multifamily affordable housing. Our first presenter will be Brad Leiben. He is an associate at David Baker Architects, where he helps lead the firm's prefabricated modular multifamily housing efforts, as well as DBA Lab, which is DBA's research, post-occupancy evaluation, and tactical urbanism arm. Brad was project architect for Pacific Point, the first 100% affordable housing development in the new Hunters Point Shipyard neighborhood of San Francisco. He's currently project architect on a 300-unit modular project in Silicon Valley. Our next presenter will be Larry Pace. He is the founder and president of Cannon Constructors North, as well as the COO of Factory OS. Larry Pace has more experience with off-site construction than any other contractor in California. He has nearly 4 decades experience building commercial structures and multifamily housing, with a hand in some of the Bay Area's most iconic buildings and restoration projects. Larry has built hundreds of apartments and condos using modular home construction technologies and has worked through every mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and structural variable to manifest cost and time savings that the traditional construction industry never dreamed possible. And our last presenter will be Sharon Christians. She is the senior housing developer with Mercy Housing California. She has worked in affordable housing development for over 20 years, developing thousands of her development experience and deep understanding of affordable housing finance to achieve beautiful award buildings that house special populations, including elders, persons with physical and developmental disabilities, and formerly homeless individuals, among others. She believes in development that are outward facing, serving as a community asset by providing services that address local neighborhood needs. Today's learning objectives to learn the cost and time-saving opportunities for affordable housing associated with prefab construction, to learn how to navigate the regulatory hurdles associated with prefab, learn about design constraints and opportunities associated with prefab, and learn how construction documentation techniques may vary for prefabrication. Today's course description: as construction costs soar, funding for multifamily affordable housing remains relatively stagnant. The result is that multifamily affordable housing developers are increasingly pinched, forced to find creative ways to reduce already tight construction budgets. Too often this causes delays and adversely affects the quality of the end product. Meanwhile, the factory-built modular housing market is growing more sophisticated and efficient. It is estimated that the average modular multifamily project can save anywhere from 5 to 10% overall construction costs relative to a traditionally framed building, not to mention the time savings of up to 40%. Yet to date, the modular industry has primarily served great developers. The fact is that there are a number of financing, logistical, and permitting challenges that make modular affordable housing more difficult to achieve than modular market rate housing. Addressing these challenges has been the opportunity to increase the affordable housing pipeline and address the affordability crisis. And today, if you have any questions, any technical or content-related questions, submit them in the chat box, and as soon as possible. And content-related questions will be discussed at the end of the project when we a presentation when we open it up to everyone. Today's is, please take a moment to look over the copyright information on today's presentation, as well as the compliance statement regarding AIA knowledge. And following today's presentation, please complete the survey. You'll be able to submit feedback as well as get your continuing education credit. All right, and with that, I would like to pass it off to our presenters today. Brad, are you there?
Yes. Let's see. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just getting things to the right place in my slide deck. Okay, great.
All right, thanks guys. Looking forward to this. Thank you for joining us, and take it away.
Okay, thanks Garrett and Thomas and the AIA for hosting this webinar. So I'm Brad Lieben. I'm with a firm called David Baker Architects. We do a lot of different types of architecture, but we're primarily known for our multifamily housing and our affordable housing in particular. I think before I dive in, I'm just going to kind of explain a little bit about the webinar. So I'm going to be speaking obviously from the architect's perspective and talking a little bit about like the regulatory process for prefabricated modular, sort of how to design for it, and documentation. And then we have Larry Pace, who's one of the founders of Factory OS, who's going to be talking really about like the benefits of modular, and Larry's really one of the industry leaders in modular construction. And then we have Sharon Christian from Mercy Housing, who's a fantastic affordable housing developer here in the Bay Area, who's going to be talking a little bit about the financing and logistical side of realizing modular for affordable housing developers. So as I said, our firm, David Baker Architects, focuses on housing, and about half of our work is affordable. We've been around for quite a long time. I've only been at the firm for a small fraction of that time. And we do projects that are like this one, really dense, urban infill, mixed use housing developments. And we try to really think about like how we activate ground floors and make buildings that contribute to the local context, parcel community. We try to design for people as well as dogs, as you can see in this photo. And then we also do some other typologies, like this is a boutique hotel that we just did recently. By the way, is my screen not, is my slideshow working?
Yeah, Brad, this is Tommy. You're not on the full screen right now in your slideshow.
We're caught up with you. Now we see what you see.
Okay. How about now, Tommy? Like, can you see the full screen image of a hotel?
Yes.
Yes, I see it. It's still not the full screen. We still see the sidebar, but I do see the full image.
Yeah, I don't know why. I don't think it's anything that you're doing, because your screen obviously doesn't look like
strange.
that.
Let me see if I can.
Yeah, that's okay. We still see the presentation.
Yeah, I think it's fine.
All right,
We're
I'll just keep going. Okay, so anyways, we do sort of every flavor of affordable. This is a family affordable project we recently completed in San Francisco. This is a senior affordable that actually just won an AIA Code Award. workforce housing project, and then this is a formerly homeless housing project we did in San Francisco. And Sharon's going to talk a little bit more about the challenges and the huge need for bringing affordable housing to market, particularly in California. There's a real shortage of housing here, and then we're seeing like 5 to 10% construction cost escalation annually. And meanwhile, the funding sources, as Sharon's going to explain, kind of don't keep up with the escalation that we're seeing when it comes to affordable housing. And so when we're designing for affordable housing, we're always looking at ways that we can increase the speed of delivery, that we can produce denser housing, get more bang for the buck, reduce cost, but we always want to keep an eye on quality. And that's really important, is not just to be designing to save money and speed things up, but to the end goal should be a better quality product. And so there's many ways that we achieve that. One of them is just basic affordability by design strategies. So, really efficient floor plates, just kind of smart design, and then using simple materials, but like well-proportioned facades, judicious use of more premium materials on the exteriors, and just kind of using the budget in the most effective way possible. And then also leveraging building code changes. So like this project is a micro unit project in San Francisco, and a project of this density just would not have been possible 10 years ago.
We're not on the same screen as you, but we understand.
We're still here. That is unfortunate. I don't know.
I don't think it's anything that you're, now we're just cut up.
Maybe I should just stay in this mode.
I think so.
Okay.
I'm having trouble with the connection.
Okay. Okay. So anyways, this
Brad,
project, yes.
Brad, if you hit the bottom left button as a full screen there, should be all right.
He's on the full screen.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to be
I wonder if
doing full screen.
Can we hit that?
No.
So I'm just going to stay in this mode here,
Yeah.
because it seems to work better. Okay, so any case, kind of leveraging code evolution. So from this project is micro units, would not have been possible 10 years ago because San Francisco had sort of minimum dwelling unit sizes. Also, there's now the California density bonus, which actually comes in pretty handy with modular, which tend to be taller buildings because of thicker floor plates, and it gives us more height than is typically allowed in the zoning. And then new legislation in California like SB 35, which sort of streamlines affordable housing development. And then in addition to that, there's the technological side, and modular, I think, is like the biggest, most interesting technological kind of innovation of late. And our office has done quite a bit of modular work. It's becoming increasingly popular. So we've designed 1,400 modular apartments. We just finished one actually with Larry down in Union City. That was a 240 unit project. And this is market rate. And, but I think the challenges, which we're going to talk about for affordable housing to go modular, are more significant than they are for market rate developers. And so we're just starting to get into more affordable modular projects. This is one down in San Jose. That's a 82 unit formerly homeless project. And then one that we're doing with Mercy Housing and with Sharon, 146 unit formerly homeless project in San Francisco. And our modular experience actually goes back quite a ways to 2006. This is a family affordable project that we did in San Francisco. And at that time, the Mayor's Office of Housing asked us to look at using modular. There was a newer factory back then. And so we actually sort of redesigned the project to be modular. And at that time, it didn't actually come back with significant enough savings. And so we went back to traditional construction. And so I just bring this up because I think that the modular industry has actually come like a really, really long way since then. And there's factories all over the country. And we now have one here in the Bay Area called Factory Us, which Larry co-founded. And this list is actually out of date. And but it's really
I know.
Yeah. But there's still, I think, a lot of room to improve. And Larry is kind of leading the charge on that here in the United States. This is a factory in Europe called Lindbach that uses a lot of automation, and that stuff is I think in Europe they've been doing modular multifamily for a longer time, and so have a little bit of an edge, but we're catching up here in the U.S. So the benefits of modular, up to 40% time savings on the construction phase. 5 to 10% of construction cost savings is what we're seeing, but I think Larry has seen higher numbers, and I think that the numbers are only going to get better because modular is still kind of a young technology, and the industry is still adapting to it. And so while there have been modular projects that have not gone well, there are increasingly modular projects that are getting better, and it has to do with how we design for modular, how the subcontractors are figuring out how to bid it more accurately. And so over time, we're going to see better and better time and construction cost savings. And the other thing I'll say about it is you actually get a better construction product because it's built in a factory in a more controlled environment. The modular buildings have better acoustics just because of the way that they're built, and there's better energy performance also because the envelope is a little tighter. And so this is kind of like the basics of why modular projects are faster, is because you're able to be building the superstructure, the housing portion of it, while you're in the ground, like laying utilities and pouring your foundations. And so you can kind of do two things concurrently rather than sequentially, like you would in a traditional project. But there are still a lot of challenges that we're working through. These are kind of the general challenges that would apply to either a market rate project or an affordable one. There's still a lack of, not all general contractors know how to do modular, and a lot of subcontractors are unfamiliar with it, so they kind of pad their bids because they're a little bit nervous about it. And then there's a very unique permitting and inspection process, which I'll talk about. And then labor unions are sometimes opposed to modular just because they see it as taking certain areas of their scope and putting it in a factory that might be in a different city or state. And then for affordable housing developers, Sharon's going to talk more about this, but there's some challenges just because the funding that they get, tax credits and other public funding sources come at certain times in the design and construction process that are often kind of geared around the traditional construction process. And with modular, you need money sooner because you have to put down a down payment to secure your place in the production line, and you have to start procuring materials a lot sooner because you're like building the housing units at the same time that you're in the ground, pouring foundations. So you got to like order windows months before you're even in the ground. And then there's also affordable housing developers. They tend to have smaller projects than market rate, and the type of units they have is more varied. They're required to have certain percentages, different kinds of unit mix that tends to lower the modular efficiency. And then we're seeing more demand for modular. So, and the number of factories kind of isn't keeping up with that. And so there's kind of a supply demand issue where costs are going up. And then bonding capacity is a real issue for a lot of these affordable housing developers. There's a risk that if the factory, which is responsible for such a huge portion of the building, were to go out of business, then they're not bondable, then there's really a huge risk there. And so there's different ways that different developers are dealing with that risk. And so what is modular? This is a building module. The dimensions are kind of based around like transportation regulations. So basically what can fit on a double wide trailer. And so typically a module is a piece of a dwelling unit on either side of the corridor and then the chunk of the corridor that connects them. And so this would be like a studio apartment, which is one mod. Each unit is part of one mod. But if you were to do like a 1-bedroom apartment, you'd have to put 2 mods together and then tie them together side by side because a 1-bedroom requires 2 mods in terms of its width. And so this is an image of a factory, and this is one in Idaho, and they're putting together these mods, and then they weatherproof them and stage them like this once they arrive on the site, and then they get craned into place like this and stacked up. This is an example of what the interior of a mod looks like. They're completely finished down to like the toilet paper holder is installed. And so from a zoning code standpoint, one of the things to be aware of is that, like, this is a typical, like, if you have often for like a type 3 building, you'll be in a 65-foot zoning envelope, and so you could have a 15-foot ground floor and 10-foot floor to floors upstairs with 9-foot ceilings. But if you go modular, because of the way that you're stacking the boxes and you have the floor of one mod on top of the ceiling of another, you get lower ceilings, you go down to 8 foot to keep within the zoning envelope, or you have to go taller than the zoning envelope in order to keep the same ceiling height that you would have in a traditional project and still have like a nice 15-foot ground floor. And then the building permit process, like, I'm most familiar with California. I think it varies a little bit from state to state, but the way it works here is that the modular portions of the building are permitted at the state level. And then all the site work is permitted by the local jurisdiction. And so the local jurisdictions actually have to sort of abdicate inspection of what's inside of the dwelling units, because that's reviewed by the state. And that sometimes creates challenges with local jurisdictions not being willing to do that. This is maybe a little too in the weeds, but basically what happens is the factory built portions of the building are reviewed and inspected by the state. They're inspected in the factory, and the state just puts like an insignia of approval on it. And then when those mods that have been approved by the state arrive on site, the local inspector is just supposed to see that insignia and accept it as permitted. And they're just supposed to review and inspect the site-built portions of the building. And one thing to remember is that, like I said, this is 10% is currently what we're seeing as the best case, but I think it's getting better. And the challenges with it, in part, are just that you have to remember that even though the factory-built portions of the building look like a huge chunk of the building, in terms of the actual construction budget, they're really around a third. And so it's hard. That makes it a challenge to get. I guess what I'm saying is there's a limit to the amount of savings that you can get with modular. And one of the things, and then the other challenge is just that, as I was saying before, a lot of the subcontractors often don't know how to bid it. And so even if you design a building to be built in a modular way, you still have to really carefully review all the bids that you're getting. And then the other thing is design plays a huge role in this, because what we try to do when we design a modular building is to move as much of the building into the factory scope as possible, so that it can be, so that we can get as much of that factory savings as we can. And so the way that we're able to design for modular is to really think carefully about our floor plans. So you'll see that in this building, all the party walls align. And so I've highlighted the mods here. And what we try to do is minimize the amount of cross connections that happen between the units, because every time we go between a unit or cross connect, we have to go in and do site work to kind of patch up that threshold. And so that's just an example of how we try to design for modular. I'm going to kind of try to go pretty quickly because I think I've gone over time. The corridors are where all the utilities get tied together, and so we try to do very clear drawings about what is in. We actually do two drawing sets, one for the factory built portions, and then one for the site built, so that the site subs know exactly. So like each detail we draw twice, and once to show the site subs what their scope is, and once for the factory subs to show them what their scope is. And it helps with permitting too, because the state knows what they need to review and the local jurisdiction knows what they need to review. And then our consultants do the same. So this is an example of a structural schedule that clearly breaks it down. And then the other cool thing about modular is that we get to do like a prototype unit. And the reason for that is that it's not like traditional construction, which is like kind of built. You can kind of go in and change where you want the outlets to go while it's getting built. Once the factory production line starts, there's really no changing anything. There's no slowing it down, and so we have to build this prototype unit in advance to kind of make sure that everything is exactly the way we want it. And it really helps. Like often we stage the units like you see in the image on the right, and it kind of just helps like work out kinks earlier on. And I think it's another way in which we often get a better built product with modular. We're also able to do like water testing of the windows and energy testing of the mods before they go into production and correct any issues there. Let's see. This is Sharon's going to talk more about this project. It's one that we're doing with Mercy as well as Tipping Point and the San Francisco Accelerator Fund. 145 units for formerly homeless in San Francisco. And I think the thing I just wanted to touch on with it is that one of the reasons that this modular formerly homeless project is possible is because the city, because it's a very low income project, the trade unions in the city were okay with it moving forward. In other cases, we've had more trouble with that. And also because it's privately funded. And so in San Francisco, what that means is that there's less city review. So often the mayor's Office of Disability here has a very intensive review process which will slow down and add cost to the project. And that's not happening here because it's privately funded. And also because it's privately funded, it became easier for us to kind of underwrite the risk of any issues with factory bonding capacity. And then lastly, in California, we have this great state density bonus, which I mentioned earlier, which allowed us to go over the zoning code height limit in order to gain the additional height that was required for a modular project. And then I'm going to wrap up. I'm supposed to just do a little plug for this this awesome guide that the AIA recently put out about modular housing, which I recommend everyone checking out. And that's it. I'm going to turn it over to Larry. Thanks.
Okay, you're doing Rachel.
Okay, he's gonna give us a screenshot, but you can introduce yourself and talk about the link because he's gonna send the link first. Yeah, you can start.
Hi, my name is Larry Bays. I'm the founder of Factory OS and partners with Rick Holiday. I've also been in the construction industry for 40 years. With two other previous manufacturers I used to create modulars, I've set over 1,200 of these in Northern California in the field. And the rest is just, to discuss with you Factory OS. The best thing I think that we can do here is I'm going to ask Thomas to have you all go to our video. So Thomas, if you can get everybody on that right now, that'll kind of give them an overview of the factory, and then I'll talk about the aspects of the factory afterwards.
Thanks, Larry. Everyone, if you check your chat box, you should see the link. And after you watch that video, please come back to the webinar.
It's working.
Yep, Autodesk link.
Oh, perfect. Yeah.
Okay.
Hello, everybody. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video. Hopefully, I'm speaking to somebody here other than myself. Okay.
Yep,
Real
Gary,
quickly.
Tommy, I hear you.
Great. Thank you very much. So back to the Factory OS. As you saw in our video, we're roughly 256,000 square feet. We now have 187 employees. We manufacture 3 volumes a day now, and 3 volumes can either be 6 studio apartments or any combination thereof. My personal opinion is the best way to do a modular project is to have center load corridors, like Brad was explaining to you earlier. It's the most cost efficient and it's literally the best way to go about manufacturing them. As I stated earlier, I've set over 1,200 of these in Northern California, as well as I'm now the principal and chief operating officer of Factory OS. The business about 5 to 10% savings, I actually feel it's quite a bit greater than that. But as Brad stated earlier, it's taken quite a bit educating the subcontractor community as it relates to being able to have maximum efficiency with the general contractors for being able to not only erect the buildings, but do the MEP connections, structural connections, exterior skin, and roofing. We're currently working with a number of, especially in Northern California, general contractors to help educate them in that fashion. So, less time, obviously, I guess I said to you earlier, we are building 3 volumes a day. I like to use the term volumes versus modulars because that can be as many as 6 studios. I won't keep repeating myself with a center loaded corridor. Waste. There is absolutely no comparison in building modular construction as it relates to being green, primarily when it comes to the waste. I always like to make sure that everybody understands that what we do, especially at Factory OS, and it should be at any factory for building modular construction, is it's a kit of parts. The efficiencies that are created by being able to do it in a controlled environment and by using a kit of parts, just as it relates to waste alone, is staggering. I'm currently working with Autodesk and putting together a video to prove that we only have 20% of the waste of traditional construction. Less site impact. Once again, if we have a 100 volume building or 100 modulars, which could be 200 studio apartments or any variation thereof, we literally can erect the building in 10 working days. And I say this from current experience. As I said, I've set over 1,200 of them. There is absolutely no reason that you can't set 10 to 12 volumes a day in the field. Greater predictability. Once again, there's just no comparison to traditional construction in the aspect of, Brad touched on it earlier, the quality control that goes into the facility, both Factory OS, I'll give you an example. We use Manufacton. We track from the very first segment of the building being done at each of the 33 workstations. We also do a video library, but each inspection for all 33 stations is tracked through Manufacton. The inspections are far more intense than they are in traditional construction, therefore giving you greater predictability and far greater quality control for your end product. Increased safety. Once again, if looking at the slide you see in front of you, it's pretty evident that if you can do the work in a controlled environment without having people climbing all over the building, as well as stocking and everything else, the increased safety is there's just no comparison. The repeatability of efficiency. One thing that we are doing, especially at Factory S, working with David Baker and Associates, is we're trying to make sure as we do this, and Brad touched on it, so you don't need to hear from me, and I know the permitting process intimately, as we also are doing more and more projects with David Baker and Associates, we're creating what we call a catalog of units. The catalog of units, the reason that's so important to all of you in the affordable world is as we develop this catalog of units, you will literally be able to, as you do your massing study, use the catalog for the volumes and sizes and the unit types, and those will be buildings and volumes that will already have fabrication drawings done for them, which will dramatically increase not only time but savings. If you look at our slide that's up right now, the offsite construction, I don't want to get too much into this, but it's self-explanatory. On the left is literally that's business as usual, and it's chaotic. When you follow the diagram we have on the right-hand side, as I said, working with companies like David Baker and Associates, DBI, and other, structural engineers, Stephen Tipping and everyone else. Well, Stephen, unfortunately, is gone now, but, that was terrible, I guess.
I appreciate you remembering.
Well, Stephen's actually who I started working on this with 5 years ago. But Charles Salter and Associates and so forth, we've streamlined the efficiency and the ability to make it a far more predictable process. So, strategic partners. We at Factory OS have developed strategic partnership with vendors, therefore, once again, lowering the cost of materials that we have and getting far greater predictability in pricing. The other thing that we're able to do, which is pretty unique, is, and I don't want to get long-winded about how conventional buildings are built, but for example, we buy all our drywall right from Georgia Pacific. We buy it in volume. Same thing with Dow Tile, same thing with Altera Windows, and is currently working with Panasonic, as well as a couple others. This savings is directly able to be translated and given back to the affordable developers we're doing business with. You hate to say it this way, but cutting out several of the middlemen that are in the supply chain that you normally get 2 and 3 markups on, along with the subcontractor community. On-site, it's self-explanatory, the slide that's in front of you. We greatly increase our productivity on-site in the factory from on-site. It's all, we don't have weather delays. We don't have efficiency for stocking buildings or the inefficiency of stocking buildings. Our current movement is that we move a volume every 2.5 hours. We shift the line. Therefore, that's how we're able to create 3 volumes a day, or as many as 60 or 120 studio apartments a week. So, proven success in and off-site construction. Well, as I was saying to the other folks I'm sitting here with today, as I said, I've set over 1,200 of these in the field. My factory is currently finishing its 3rd project, getting ready to start its 4th. Like any industry, we've all taken some lumps and bruises through the course of the learning curve that we've gone through, but I can honestly tell you, and I believe that we've now hit a point where we're going to see maximum proficiency in the industry. Okay. Right now you're looking at a project called 5830 3rd Street in San Francisco. Once again, we did this with a gang here at Holiday Development, so to speak. This is a market rate apartment building. This was first put on the books 5 years ago. I believe I finished the project over 3 years ago, and it was the single largest modular project ever built in the city of San Francisco, and it actually went great. So now,
hey Larry, this is Tommy. I just wanted to say we want to leave time for Q&A at the end.
I'm good.
We wanted to hear from Sharon.
Sure. Well, something you've heard enough from me anyways. And Brad certainly touched on most of that. Great. Let's turn it over.
Okay, I am going to the beginning of my presentation. Can you folks see it? No.
I do see it.
Share my.
I'm still in the restrooms.
Hold on.
I think you're good. But I think you're on your last slide.
I'm on my last slide. So how do I get back to my first slide? I did it. Rachel. Oh, beautiful. That is beautiful. Look at that. Perfect. Thank you so much. Mm-hmm. All right, everyone. I think that really Brad and Larry touched on most of the quote-unquote issues, but the things that Brad asked me to kind of focus on was sort of the challenges and the reason why we're going to factory-built housing and the affordable housing community is, the cost escalation that we've seen in the last several years has been really more towards the 10% per year, and it's getting to make affordable housing development basically cost infeasible in a lot of areas. And the reasons for that escalation is reduced subpool after the last recession. I didn't put here, but it's also reduced labor. There's a significant labor shortage in the Bay Area, and it's mostly due to the fact that there's a lack of affordable housing in the area, and that the kind of folks that would work on a construction site just can't afford to live in the area. And then there's very complicated public green, stormwater, and local code requirements that really drive costs. Public financing lenders and regulated agencies are becoming less and less tolerant of high costs and are starting to put high cost limits on projects. And those are really going to start moving the needle, because what they do is basically say that a project is unfundable, or that the developer fee will be reduced, and the developer will basically, have to, reduce their fee in order to go forward with a very high cost project. So what we're interested in is time and cost savings with doing modular housing. And as Brad brought up, some of the caveats there, we have to come up with capital sooner. So we're working with our local agencies here in San Francisco. When we basically get lots of pre-development funding from the locals, from the local mayor's office of housing. So they're basically going to fund significant modular deposits before we close with a construction lender. And then the other significant issue is that currently many modular providers cannot bond, and our public lenders and affordable housing construction lenders require bonds for this significant part of the project. So that's something that we're working through currently. So some case studies, if you will, are two projects that Mercy is working on in San Francisco currently, with Factory OS to be the modular provider likely, is 1064 Mission. The reason why this one will be factory-built housing is because the city is basically taking the land from the federal government, and the federal government requires that the project be placed in service within 3 years. In San Francisco, we typically see projects take about 6+ years from the time of site acquisition or beginning of pre-development activities till opening of doors. So we had to do factory-built housing to reduce the construction duration. And then the city, as Brad was kind of indicated before, we're a very strong union town. The city needed a bit of an excuse or a way to negotiate with the unions to allow a publicly financed project to be modular. And so this gave them a little bit of an excuse to say to the unions, okay, we need to have this be modular because we want to basically take this land for $1 from the federal government. And this 100% of this building will support people currently experiencing homelessness. And our city has a very significant homelessness challenge. And the city is really trying to get serious in addressing homelessness. So our team here is Mercy with Episcopal Community Services, who is one of the prominent homeless services service providers here in San Francisco. They'll own and operate the building after development. Architects are Herman Culliver Locus, who have done a lot of affordable housing in San Francisco, but no factory-built housing, because very little factory-built housing has been built in San Francisco. So we teamed them with Lowney Architecture, who has done quite a bit of factory-built housing throughout the state of California. So essentially, Lowney is doing the state set. They're not the architect of record. HCLA is the architect of record for the entire project, but they're drawing the factory-built component of the project. And then Cahill Contractors LLC has been building affordable housing in San Francisco with Mercy and others for many, many years. And they're the only affordable housing contractor that we work with consistently that has done factory-built housing. So they were selected to be the contractor. This is like the next slide, hopefully it's showing on your screen, is the floor plan of 1064 Mission. So if you see the far left is the ground floor, all type 1 site built. The second floor, half type 1 site built. And when you start to see the dark gray, that's all factory built housing. So as Brad was indicating earlier, we try to get as much as possible, i.e. the entire housing part of the project, to be factory built housing. Really the only thing that's on the ground floor and that little bit of gray on the second floor, those are all social services that are going to serve the residents and the community, and that's the only bit that's site built. And then the dark gray is essentially all units and services that are going to be on the upper floors. So our next case study is a project that Brad referred to earlier, is this project that Mercy is working on with the Tipping Point Foundation. And Tipping Point is this foundation that is very interested in ending chronic homelessness. So they're basically taking what do you call this? Donations from other people who need, I don't know, a tax deduction or something, and they're also interested in the mission. And they're basically going to fund the development. So that's how the development will not have any public funding sources whatsoever. They'll basically be the gap lender, if you will. They're requiring that we do factory-built housing in order to innovate affordable housing, to produce housing serving the homeless sooner and at a more efficient cost per unit. So I think Brad discussed the basics of this project previously. You can see to the right part of your screen that we have a very, very efficient floor plan. Really on the upper floors 2 through 6 on this project, it's just units, which we think is beautiful, really beautiful. In fact, in affordable housing in San Francisco, we get into serving a lot of other community needs, and it reduces the efficiency of the project. So here's our challenges: modular complexities. It's an evolving industry. Labor, as I think we referred to earlier, we're a union town, and all the projects that have our factory-built housing that are publicly funded needed to be basically negotiated with the union. The unions had to essentially approve it, if you can believe that. LBE contracting requirements. City of San Francisco requires that we, as much as possible, utilize local business enterprises. And so I'm not sure if that's the same in other communities. It might be unusual to us, but it is something that has limited and really reduced our subpool in the past. So we had to really negotiate early with our contract monitoring division that administers those policies to basically describe to them factory-built housing and how we were going to do the bid process and how we were going to adjust the goals due to the fact that we're doing factory-built housing. Permitting. I think this has been covered in the in this presentation earlier, but we did extensive work with our Department of Building Inspection to help them understand what factory-built housing was, firstly, and then secondly, we agreed to meet San Francisco code. So San Francisco, being an old city, has lots of specific code amendments that modify and add to the California Building Code. So we agreed to include all of those code requirements in the modular component of the project. The locals also are doing a courtesy review of the publicly funded modular projects in San Francisco, meaning they're reviewing the plans as a courtesy. They have no real role in the permitting process, but they're reviewing them just to basically give us a second set of eyes to ensure that we've incorporated San Francisco code. And they do that prior to us submitting to the state for the state to actually issue the permit. And then there was an MOU between the local funder, MOHCD, and OCII. OCII is our former redevelopment agency, and DBI and Mayor's Office on Disability and the Fire Department, all to just basically talk about roles and responsibilities, that they were going to do just a courtesy review of the factory-built component during plan check, and that they really don't have any inspection role after the unit shows up on site and comes with that little, medallion or whatever it is that says it's been inspected. And that's a big change because these folks are used to walking throughout the building and inspecting. So bonding, we talked about this a little bit earlier. Bonding is a big deal. We've talked about various ways to sort of address the bonding solution, and we're really the biggest, I think what we're at right now is we either need to, we have to get the factory to be able to bond really soon, because our construction lenders will require it. That's been verified. Or there's some other options. Some contractors are able to get the factory under subcontractor default insurance. That would work well as long as there was the ability for that benefit to flow down to the owner and also to the lender, because they're going to want it also. And then I think that's it. There's other options being looked at, but for the most part, we really need either a bond or SDI. Risk allocation. There's been a lot of discussion and a lot of work on contracts because none of the contracts that we've entered into previously are really tuned up for the particulars of factory-built housing. And what we really want to do is allocate risk appropriately. We don't want to have the factory tell us, oh, well, we don't accept liquidated damages, which they don't, and we're not going to bond, which they can't. And so therefore, you're going to accept all the risk. That's really unacceptable to us. So we are working on contracts that accurately allocate risk, so we can just basically put the risk where it belongs. The factory is, a critical part of this whole project is that we save the time and the factory built units show up at the time that the site needs them. If that doesn't happen, then the schedule is going to be challenged, and we feel like the factory should bear some of the cost of that issue. So that's still under discussion. And then lastly, Mercy has done a lot of work on factory-built housing. None of these pictures here show any project that Mercy has built using factory-built housing, because these two projects that we were talking about earlier really are our first factory-built housing projects. But Mercy's board is very interested in housing innovation, and they commissioned this study, if you will. This is the link to the study on the Mercy website that really shows affordable housing providers how to plan for and anticipate a factory-built housing project, which is kind of a lot of the things that we've talked about in this presentation. So I just wanted to share that with anybody who might be interested. And we're done until there's questions.
Thank you, Sharon. This is Tommy. We've gone a little over time, but I want to get to some questions. Also, guys, would you be open to, if we were to email you some of the questions that we might not have time to get to?
Sure.
Yep.
We can kind of put together a list and send them back. So the first question here, do you know the cost for some of the projects that you guys included in this presentation, cost per square foot? A lot of users they're curious of what's the, we see this between 5 to all the way up to 20% cost saving. We're just curious what you guys saw in these projects.
So we typically look at projects on a cost per unit, total development cost per unit. And so in San Francisco, I can just share, in San Francisco with a similar product, site built, it might be $600,000 per unit. So for 1064 Mission, which has a lot of site built and a lot of public benefit uses within it, we're at about $523 per unit, total development cost, not just construction. And for 833 Bryant, we're about $410,000 per unit total development cost. And again, both of those would be probably closer to like 600 if they were site built.
The other thing I can state to you is the modular component aspect of the building, they'll range anywhere from 138 to 146 a square foot, depending on the finishes and the size of the units themselves. Versus traditional construction, everything here is traditionally built is at minimum $400 a square foot. So I know it doesn't quite line up the same way because of the other aspects of the site built work, but it's pretty dramatic.
Yeah, I think some of we're looking at formerly homeless projects, or like the tipping point projects that Sharon showed the unit plans of. Those are very small units. I don't know what the square foot is, less than 300. Yeah. So the thing about that typology is that it really lends itself well to modular, because you can kind of get like the maximum modular efficiency, because each unit is its own mod, and there's much less site work, and there's certain typologies like that where you actually can get like more per unit savings maybe than you would.
That's correct, and especially if you go with a double loaded corridor like you were showing earlier, you get a maximum productivity out of being able to build your building.
Yeah.
Great. Do you guys have a sense of what number of units? So if we were to do, say, a triple decker, at what point does it really start to become? Do you really start to see savings in modular?
Well, I think you see savings in modular from anything that's between 30 and 50 units and then up. You get a greater savings for the greater amount of density you have for a multitude of reasons, because as the more typical segments and towers of the building that we can put online, the greater efficiency we can then share those savings with the development community on. So, I tell everyone that wants to come to Factory OS, we have pretty much between 30 and 50 units is pretty much our minimum order that we'll even take, because the work that we have to do on the A&E side for both creating the state set as well as our fabrication drawings, something smaller than 30 units, it's just not economical to do.
You add more units.
Yep. And as I said earlier, as we're working with David Baker and Associates, we're working at putting together a catalog that by this time next year we'll have well in hand, which will really pass on huge savings because we'll have a catalog of units that are already previously designed, and people from the very conception of their job using massing studies will be able to embrace that catalog in their design.
Yeah, I think one of the thing about modular is that you can't just design a building like you would a traditional building and then say, okay, I'd like to make it modular and then expect to get whatever the savings should be.
That's correct.
I think Larry thinks that the savings I think he's right that the savings are going to get better and better. Like he thinks the 5 to 10% that I gave is on the low end. I think that the main thing is that to get the savings, there's really a design component to it. So you can't just expect because you're building a building that wasn't designed to be modular in a factory that you're gonna. In fact, it might even cost more to do it that way if you don't design it to be modular.
That's just from Jump Street. If you're going to do a modular project, it needs to be designed to be modular from the very beginning. That's one of the reasons that we at Factory OS do what we call a feasibility study with both developers and architects when they're looking at doing their massing study or their original conceptual drawings. It needs to be done from the very beginning all the way through. It's taking a traditionally built building and then somehow making it modular friendly. I have seen very little success in doing that.
Right. And so I think for the architects, really understanding how to design for the efficiency of modular will help the bottom line significantly.
It's also, as we work with companies like David Baker and Associates and Lowney, getting everyone to use Revit so that as they do their drawings, we can directly take those Revit drawings and immediately go into our fabrication drawings.
Yeah, and I think that's actually one of the really cool things about modular is that it's really it's a product. It's like buying a window or something where the modular factory produces these very detailed shop drawings, and it actually helps quite a bit with coordination, and we can sort of plug them into our Revit our BIM models and do a lot of the coordination sort of in real time with the factory.
One of the good news is just to touch on what Brad's saying. As I stated earlier, if the architects do it in Revit, we produce all of our drawings using Revit and using Structsoft, as well as using BIM. Everything that we do is BIM. Our mechanical electrical framing, it's all done in BIM, so it makes it really easy for the base building architect and team to then have immediate coordination documents they can use for the site built work. It's a kit of parts, as I like to say.
All right, guys. I'm sorry, but unfortunately we're out of time. We have a lot of good questions that we will put together and send them out to you guys so we can get them back to all the attendees. Thank you very much for this. This was very interesting. I really appreciate it. And everyone who attended, please check your email. You should be receiving a follow-up email with a survey. If you have any other questions that we didn't get to, please feel free to submit them there. Thanks, Brad. Thanks, Larry and Sharon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Thomas. Thanks, Garrett.
Thanks.